Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So this is going to be a brief video about something which has happened in Russia, which shows really the depths of Putin's cynicism. That a new church for the Russian army has been opened, and in it there are pictures of various people painted on the wall, including Stalin. Yeah, you heard that right, Stalin, one of the most vicious genocidal tyrants of all time, who slaughtered more Russians than anyone besides Adolf Hitler. And there he is with a huge image in there. It is staggering. A man who was really a sworn enemy of Russia. I know he ruled the country. He was a Georgian. There's not an anti-Georgian thing, but so many people were killed by him, being executed often for crimes they didn't commit, being executed for so-called crimes which weren't crimes, which really just having a different opinion. So many people put into cattle trucks, dispatched to Siberia, dying of malnutrition or cold along the way, dying from overwork, lack of adequate clothing, sanitation, and so on. Deliberately created famines in Russia and other Soviet republics. Millions of people died from that. Torture used on an absolutely industrial scale. But most ironic of all, someone who viciously persecuted Christianity, particularly the Orthodox Church, executing thousands of priests, monks, and nuns, tens of thousands more dispatched to the Gulag to be slave laborers all over the Soviet Union, who destroyed many churches, who seized almost every church building and used it for secular purposes as granaries and so on, set up the League of the Militant Godless, a youth movement which was proactively anti-religious, who promoted atheism in school and elsewhere, and he is held up as some sort of Orthodox saint. It is staggering. No, they haven't officially called him a saint, but why would you have his image up there? You're honouring him. And really, this is just the height of Putin's doublethink, that someone who was extremely and violently anti-Christian will now be adulated as though he's a promoter, a defender of Christianity. Wow. Now, admittedly, in the Second World War, he brought it back a little bit, appointed some patriarch, and that was that. And a handful of churches were allowed to operate. Obviously, after the Second World War, persecution began again, but they still kept a patriarch. It's quite useful to have a collaborator. They could say, we have religious liberty, because they had a handful of churches open. That it blows my mind. Rewriting history, just this whitewashing of the extreme cruelty of the Soviet state to its own people. The Soviet people were the principal victims of our communist tyranny. Not that the Tsars were better sometimes. Well, sometimes equally bad. I'm not sure they were ever worse, actually. And, Putin, much though I despise him, he's only about 1% as bad as Stalin. So, and who else has got their image there? Putin. Wow, isn't that nauseating? A serving president having their image up there. Okay, I live in a monarchy. You see the monarch's image in some places. Is that unpalatable? Some people would say yes, but it is a monarchy that's always been like that. And then Putin's going back to this cult of personality about himself, and Shoigu, the current defense minister, who many people believe is going to be Putin's replacement, and this is yet more evidence that that's likely. And then words on the wall of this army church: our Crimea. Obviously, Crimea lawfully belongs to Ukraine. I know that Russia controls it; it's been illegally occupying it since 2014. Ukraine became independent. Russia recognized that, recognized the frontiers, that Crimea is part of Ukraine, and Crimea and Ukraine bent over backwards to accommodate Russia about this issue, making all sorts of concessions, allowing Russian to be the principal language of Crimea, and allowing the Russian Black Sea Fleet to be stationed there. How was Ukraine repaid for this extraordinary generosity? By being invaded, by being constantly defamed, called Nazis, and all these vile things as well. Anyway, so it really is sickening, and also the taxpayer is paying for this. The much put upon Russian taxpayer. A lot of people who live in virtual poverty. It's been calculated only 14%. Yeah, 14% of Russians count as middle class. The rest are working class or even underclass. About 20% of people live below Russia's own poverty line, and that's real poverty. I'm not saying they're dying of starvation, but they're close to malnourished. Anyway. And then this myth being put about that the Soviet Union was so anti-Nazi. Now it's true in the Second World War from June 1941, fought gallantly, and don't take that away from people. Okay, some people really were heroic and suffered more than any Western people would be willing to suffer. But before that, for almost 2 years, the Soviet Union had actively assisted Nazi Germany, being their co-belligerent, attacking Poland with them, selling all the oil they needed, doing everything they could to undermine the Franco-British war effort against the Third Reich, giving the German Navy a base in the extreme north of the Soviet Union, Basis Nord, and the German Kriegsmarine was warmly appreciative of this, sent a letter of thanks, I should say. The NKVD, that's the Soviet secret police, having meetings with the Gestapo, handing people over, and on and on and on. So those poor German communists rounded up in 1933 in concentration camps, really believing in Stalin as their big daddy, that the Soviet Union was the promised land, that they were building a better society to liberate the proletariat and the peasantry and bring equality and no more racism and no more gender discrimination, making life better for ordinary people. Maybe they were sincere, but they were sorely deluded. And thrown into these concentration camps where they languished for 12 years. If they survived, many of them died. And not once did Stalin ask for their release. He had a very close collaborative relationship with Germany 1939 to 41, and he didn't ask for his ideological soulmates to be set free. And many of them died avoidably. So anyway, recently it was the anniversary of the meeting on the Elbe, as in the River Elbe in Germany, where Soviet and American troops met towards the end of the Second World War. It was semi-staged. But anyway, and the Russian army was there to meet the US army this time. But, Russia is only one of the 16 constituent Union republics. So you could have them from Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. Obviously, the Soviet Union had invaded them in 1940, not for the first time. So many people, so many politicians, middle-of-the-road politicians called fascists, as being liberal, conservative, social democrat, sent to the gulags, never seen again, worked to death. So many of the intelligentsia also sent to gulags, and just no rights, no fair trial, no freedom of speech. It was a very heavily oppressive system of state terror on a gargantuan scale. So you could have some of the men from those armies there, because some of them were in the Red Army during the Second World War. You could have Moldovans, Belarusians, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, Georgians, Kazakhs, any of these other nationalities. I would particularly have Ukrainians, because it will so infuriate Putin. Because there were Ukrainians in the Red Army, you can't deny that. That's absolutely true. Yes, it's true that a handful of them joined the Wehrmacht, and there were Ukrainians who fought both sides, just like there are Russians who were in the Wehrmacht, the Russian Liberation Army, and so on. Because up until 1939, the Soviet Union had killed far, far more people than the Third Reich. The Third Reich killed several hundred people on Night of the Long Knives, up to 1,000. That's the highest estimate. About 100 people on Kristallnacht. And what else? Some people legally executed. Up to 1939, I'm not aware of people being killed or dying in the concentration camps. Maybe there were. So maybe it's a couple of thousand. And then there was a T4 program killing disabled people in Germany. All of this is appalling. All of this is murder. So maybe several thousand people have been killed by the Third Reich up to 1939. So that's absolutely dreadful. It's despicable. In the Soviet Union, been several million. It was far, far more. So unsurprisingly, some people thought communism was worse. The Nazism would be mild by comparison, which is why they went that way, because they'd suffered such cruelty, such injustice, being deliberately starved to death by Stalin's regime. Some of them thought, well, Germany can't be worse. We know Stalin's lied about everything. Maybe he's lying about this when he says Nazism is so bad. So there we have him rewriting history and wasting public money in a secular state on this church. So desperate to bolster loyalty for his tin pot tyranny, then appealing to religion. It's a weak leader has to rely on that. He never particularly claimed to be religious. Why do you stop abortions then, if you're so religious? If you believe in the soul, the babies have a soul, the Orthodox Church is against them, but you're never going to do that. He was a communist, and that was incompatible with Christianity. Putin doesn't believe in Christianity. Who could be so stupid as to think that he does? And he was there repressing people for being religious, sending them to slave labor camps as recently as the 1980s, banning certain types of Christians like Jehovah's Witnesses. I know they're a bit weird, but they're not evil, they're not dangerous. Putin is dangerous. Look how many of his own people he's killed. Oh my goodness, it's just endless how vile this man is. Yeah, and I mean, I know he's not the very worst tyrant in the world. There are worse tyrants, Kim Jong-un and so on, but he loves the cruelest tyrants like Kim Jong-un or Berdi Mohamedov and so on. So that's it. It's a very depressing move, but it's not really going to work because only about 50% of Russians are Orthodox Christians, and the Muslim population is growing. How do you like that, Putin? And so a lot of Russians are non-religious, and some of them belong to minor Christian denominations. So there we are. That's me rant over about this despicable display of Putin's face there. I mean, wow. Can you get over the vanity of it, the egomania? It's the kind of thing that's worthy of Donald Trump. Good night.